Warm greetings from our home in the south of Spain. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you on this occasion. I think I'm recording this talk on the one hand for a symposium tomorrow at Macau University, organized by my old friend and colleague at a distance, Huang Guowen, and on the other hand for the Halliday Library, where I was contacted by Cheng Changwang and Yang Bingjin to produce a video on the theme of M.A.K. Halliday and my research. So this is a projection of that. I say M.A.K. Halliday and my research. I would hope that this can be treated as a placeholder. On the one hand, the whole year, I think, can be a celebration of Michael's centenary. On the other hand, I'm still unpacking from a move from Hong Kong to Spain, and lots of material that I would have liked to access I need to find in boxes in a storage unit. The theme should really be Michael Halliday and my life, because, and this is something I would like to celebrate and I'm very grateful for, so much of my life has been intertwined with his work, both in person and before I met him and after he left us materially. I've organized this around phases of engagement with his work. Phase 1, mid-70s to 1980, this was before I met Michael Halliday. I got very interested in his work and I was trying to get an understanding of what Hallidayan linguistics was about. Phase 2, most of the 1980s, I was doing my master's and PhD at UCLA and also working at the Information Sciences Institute, where I was a research linguist and Michael Halliday was a consultant. Phase 3, most of the 90s, in Sydney. I'd moved to Sydney, first Sydney University and Macquarie University, and we worked on some major publications together, coming out of the 1980s. Phase 4, most of the noughts, I was still in Sydney before I moved to Hong Kong. This included the work on the 4th edition of his Introduction to Functional Grammar, a continuation of work with Sugeno, an important project that Sugeno undertook at the Riken Institute in Tokyo. Phase 5, the remaining decade, I was in Hong Kong. We published together, thanks to Huang Guowen, Systemic Functional Grammar, First Step into the Theory, and we continued on various projects. And then in Phase 4, 2018 onwards, I moved from Hong Kong to Spain, and I'm now working alone, on my own, trying to develop complete projects that we had in the pipeline. The first phase, you can imagine, long before the World Wide Web, long before we had easy access to information, I was at Lund University looking at different approaches to linguistics, being taught the standard theory or extended standard theory at the time as part of undergraduate studies. I came across Michael Halliday's work. It was absolutely fascinating. It solved some key problems for me in my thinking about language, informed also by European structuralism. So I tried to make sense of this. And here's an example of writing to Dick Hudson in 1978, asking together with a friend of mine if we could see him in London in the early period of January 79 to ask questions. And it may be hard now to imagine how difficult it was to piece together a picture of what I call to myself Hallidayan linguistics. Hudson was very helpful and actually saw him a few times over a couple of years, and he sent me drafts of work that led to his word grammar. I tried to piece this together, and here is the beginning of something from 1978. I wrote in English, Vem Michael Halliday och vad är systemisk grammatik? Who is Halliday and what is systemic grammar? And then I give a bit of background, Firth, Malinowski and so on, and then first section, Halliday's språksyn, Halliday's view of language. The following year, I published a monograph, about 60 pages, that I called Halliday and Linguistics, which I showed to Michael Halliday when I met him in 1980, and he commented on very kindly. Phase 2 then was the beginning of really working with Michael Halliday. After meeting him at Stanford University in March 1980, a chance meeting, also with Ruqayya Hassan, this documented elsewhere, I then attended a seminar series, 10-week seminar series, organized by Benjamin Colby at UC Irvine in the spring of 1980. And that was a tremendous experience, because I got the sense for the first time, here is a linguist who is not just playing games in linguistics, but actually has some kind of direct phone line to language, really has a sense of language, a comprehensive, holistic engagement with language and particular languages. And we worked on the Penman project together, me as a research linguist, he as a consultant, and this led to exchanges by airmail. This is before it was possible to do email to Michael at Sydney, and he came to visit fairly regularly, and I went to Sydney and stayed with him and Ruqayya, so that was a very productive period. It was also a period when we received successive versions of the draft of the first edition of IFG, which was published in 1985. And in 86, to try to answer a question by Bill Mann, the leader of the project at the Information Science Institute, we started on what was to become Construing Experience. We worked on this in Bloomington, and we called it the Bloomington Lattice. I'll say a bit more about this. So the work at the Information Sciences Institute was very important. The vision that Bill Mann had, coming from the 70s into the 80s, and selecting systemic functional linguistics as the form of linguistics, the approach to linguistics, to language, that would inform the projects he directed at ISI during the 1980s. He and I had an early publication together from 83, Nigel, a systemic grammar for text generation. This was the Nigel grammar, computational systemic grammar, and a description of English. And a couple of years ago, they celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Information Sciences Institute. And I was asked to supply a photo of Bill Mann. They regard him as one of the pioneers of the Institute. And here's a photo I took of him when we went to Sydney in 1987 to take part in ISOC. The first time it was held in Australia, organized by Michael, Jim, and others at Sydney University. Happy picture in Manly. This was also a time of engaging with other linguists in the area, and one of my proud achievements was to get Michael Halliday to give a talk at the University of Santa Barbara in 1988. I think it was 88. And it was a lovely, lovely occasion. He talked about ideational grammatical metaphor, and it led to very interesting discussions. Phase 2, from my point of view, began with moving to Sydney in 1988. And of course, the big project for Michael Halliday and me was Construing Experience. But we also worked on other tasks, a number of them initiated by Fred Peng. We were very grateful to him, even though none of the tasks that Michael and I worked on together actually came to fruition as part of Fred's grand vision of publications. But my lexicogrammatical cartography appeared in his series in 1995. And that was, of course, very much influenced by Michael's work, also many conversations with Michael. It's a period when we, and this is in blue, work influenced by Michael, but where he didn't take direct part. John Bateman and I reported our experience on text generation informed by SFL in the 1980s in a book. We developed multilingual system networks together with Zhang Zhang, and I started my work on registral cartography. So Construing Experience was one important book. Looking back on the 80s, something I tried to do over 30 years ago in a draft paper called Applying Theoretical Resources, and I tried to envisage the dialogue between linguistics and computational linguistics, specifically our experience at the Information Sciences Institute, ISI, but then also offshoots in Germany, Elke Teich, John Bateman and others, first in Darmstadt, then elsewhere. So this was very helpful in thinking about the dialogic approach to systemic functional, to engaging with and propelling forward systemic functional linguistics. Construing experience was a major work. We worked together, took different sections, different chapters, first draft. Here's the first draft by Michael Halliday. And the way we worked on this was in fact a model for the way we work together in general in publications. So sometimes there would be first handwritten draft by Michael Halliday. Sometimes he would type this up and then give it to me to enter into the computer, or he would give me the handwritten draft and then ask me to type it up, or else he would dictate to me and I would type it up directly. And these were all very interesting ways of the collaborative composition of construing experience, but also said other works we engaged with together. We call what has become known as an upper model in our ideational semantics the Bloomington lattice, because we worked on this Bloomington lattice at cafes in Bloomington, Indiana, during a semiotics summer school in 1986, when Michael taught a course on the grammar of later life. And it's been used in various projects, including one on the representation of WHO's weekly reports on outbreaks of communicable diseases. Another important project from my point of view in the 1990s was something I initiated, but Michael wrote, Computing Meanings. I'd invited him as part of a program committee to a Pacific Rim Computational Linguistics Conference hosted by Rowley Sussex in Brisbane. And I thought this was such a brilliant overview of the architecture of language in context according to systemic functional linguistics that I initiated another project, entirely non-funded, voluntary, with translations into Japanese and Chinese. Japanese by Kazuhiro Taruya, Chinese by Wu Zandong. I think it's been translated into Chinese once again, not using the original translation, which Michael was very active in helping with. And we had a number of projects meeting at my home developing this transcription. And I have happy memories of Zandong and Michael arguing about the best rendering in Chinese. And part of that was, of course, his the illustration of his cartographic approach, like the function rank matrix, which was very important in our thinking how to overview language in general, but also the development of descriptions of particular languages. The next phase was for me still in Sydney, so Michael and I continued our at least weekly interactions in Sydney, sometimes with excursions, say to Uranga, somewhere else. But there was also first half of the noughties, a project that continued collaboration with Michio Sugeno in the 90s, when he was at Tokyo Institute of Technology. He had a lab at the Riken Institute, the Brain Science Division, a Sugeno lab, and a very interesting project on what Michael glossed as computing meanings, so everyday language computing, very much originated in Sugeno's interest in SFL, coming from fuzzy theory, having read Wittgenstein, like by Bill Mann did, and this reading of Wittgenstein propelled him into systemic functional linguistics. Of course, this was a period when we worked on the third edition of Michael Halliday's Introduction to Functional Grammar. That led then to the fourth edition, and I'm currently trying very hard to complete the manuscript of the fifth edition. The fourth edition was to some extent influenced by my own Lexicart, so the attempt to include system networks. And one of the things Michael said to me when we prepared to work on the third edition, he said, let's put in some system networks. And here I have a very schematic representation of the system networks we included in the description of the clause, chapters 3 through 4, representing just the names of the system. So I was very keen to show the cartographic power of this schematic representation of system networks, just the names of systems. So you see textual, interpersonal, experiential, and we located these, of course, in his function rank matrix. Phase 5, that was, of course, the phase when I'd just moved to Hong Kong in 2008, having completed hosting ISOC at Macquarie University in 2008. Michael and I continued on various projects. One came to publication in 2009, thanks to Huang Guowen, Systemic Functional Grammar, First Step. But there were various other projects, for example, work on abstract space with a group of people at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And Michael came over to help us get this work started in 2009 as a super-duper chair professor. So we had many interesting discussions in Hong Kong. He helped me build a team there, drawing people together. We held a number of symposia, including education, and that I think was very successful in giving a boost to the activities in and around the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. It included trips to China. We continued walking around the world, Michael and myself, during this period, hiking in Hong Kong, walking on the campus of Sun Yat-sen University, for example, walking around the area where he lived in TSD in Hong Kong. And we also had many conversations over food, and I was very happy to be able to introduce Isaac Minlaro to Michael Halliday sometime around 2014, I would think, at my home in Hong Kong. One special occasion was, of course, the celebration of Michael's 90th birthday, first at Beijing Normal University in 2015, and then in May, the celebration of the 70th year of his teaching and researching Chinese, hosted by Huang Guowen at Sun Yat-sen University. So continuing from now, working alone, but with Michael present every day semiotically, I've tried to continue our path on my own. That involves work on IFG 5, progressing projects in the pipeline. I'll say a little bit more about them. And on my own, but very much always with Michael around, first volume of my collected works, edited by Kazuhiro Toruya at Michael's request. So Michael didn't tend to ask people to do things, but this was one he asked Kazuhiro Toruya to do fairly insistently, well-natured but insistently. And the first volume appeared 4 years ago. More are in the pipeline now with the University of Toronto Press. Systemic Functional Insights, a book with Wang Bo, Helen Ma, and Isaac Minlaro. A system book in the Keynote, a Key Concept series with Equinox, now University of Toronto Press 2023. And a so-called complete guide to SFL with Kazuhiro Toruya just last year. As I said, there are various unfinished projects in the pipeline. One is a 2-volume book of Outline of Systemic Functional Linguistics. Another is an introduction to English discourse with Michael Halliday. And one, a fairly late project we call Games with Grammar and Fun with Phonology, where I spelled phonology the way you might in Swedish with an F. And another book we were working on, Global and Local Languages. So the outline was intended to be an outline for readers coming from different traditions. And here is a little bit of the introduction. And we worked on it in the same style I've indicated before, in our different modes of composition. I always started with the computer, but Michael typically started with handwriting, a very fluid way of composing. So these are projects in the pipeline. Also this book on global and local languages, which I also hope to complete soon. And Games with Grammar and Fun with Phonology, we're collecting different examples that illuminate aspects of language and how SFL can shed light on them. We've both, in a sense, been linguists traveling around the world. Here's a map showing some of the paths. We've overlapped at different points. We've traveled to meet one another in different places. But there have been these phases with stable periods together, as I mentioned. In terms of my own work, whatever I've undertaken, it's been informed, inspired, enlightened, empowered by Michael Halliday's work. And that includes the different strands of my activities that have developed over the decades since around 1980. And one area that I think has grown in very significantly is the description of different languages. A whole community of us are working on this, co-publications with a number of people from around the world. What we've called multilingual studies. So we're working together on projects, we've been teaching together, and we have these publications together that I mentioned. You can find a little bit more of this in the second volume of Systemic Functional Insights. This will be on Halliday, theory and application, and it will be forthcoming in the Halliday library. And let me end with a typical sign-off, echoing Michael's Yorkshire beginnings, MHYG, mind who you go. And this is from a message he sent me when it turned out that I had to put together a talk for AAAL in Atlanta, Georgia, in 2011, I think it was. And here are his instructions to me, how I deliver his manuscript. And I think this is something I'd like to share with you. Many thanks for giving me the time to talk about this. This being a sort of collaboration that has turned out to illuminate my working life, thanks to Michael Halliday. Have a wonderful symposium, and I hope the Halliday Library will continue to be a fantastic resource for all of us. Many thanks.